Welcome to episode 29 of the Detour 365 Bible Study Podcast. This is William, the host, and I'll be joined by Bill and Nathaniel this evening as we look at Genesis 18, 16 through 33. Abraham questions God and also intercedes. Fascinating passage. Bill will begin by reading the CJB translation of Genesis chapter 18, verses 16 through 33.
The men set out from there and looked over toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to see them on their way. Adonai said, "Should I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Inasmuch as Abraham is sure to become a great and strong nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed by him? For I have made myself known to him, so that he will give orders to his children and to his household after him, to keep the way of Adonai and to do what is right and just, so that Adonai may bring about for Abraham what he has promised him." Adonai said, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin is so serious, that I will now go down and see whether their deeds warrant the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know." The men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before Adonai. Abraham approached and said, "Will you actually sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Maybe there are 50 righteous people in the city. Will you actually sweep the place away and not forgive it for the sake of the 50 righteous who are there? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous along with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Far be it from you. Shouldn't the judge of all the earth do what is just?" Adonai said, "If I find in Sodom 50 who are righteous, then I will forgive the whole place for their sake." Abraham answered, "Hear now, I, who am but dust and ashes, have taken it upon myself to speak to Adonai. What if there are 5 less than 50 righteous?" He said, "I won't destroy it if I find 45 there." He spoke to them yet again. "What if 40 are found there?" He said, "For the sake of the 40, I won't do it." He said, "I hope Adonai won't be angry if I speak. What if 30 are found there?" He said, "I won't do it if I find 30 there." He said, "Hear now, I have taken it upon myself to speak to Adonai. What if 20 are found there?" He said, "For the sake of the 20, I won't destroy it." He said, "I hope Adonai won't be angry if I speak just once more. What if 10 are found there?" He said, "For the sake of the 10, I won't destroy it." Adonai went on his way as soon as he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place.
Most excellent reading. Now,
Thank you.
this is a fairly well-known episode. I mean, as pretty much everything is in Genesis. But there's a lot as far as sermons, as far as commentaries. I've looked and I haven't I've been kind of underwhelmed as to what I've seen about this section, and I would think that there'd be more written about it, more on more on YouTube about this whole interaction, because I think there's a lot more here, and we're given it for a reason. I don't think it's just this negotiation between Abraham and God, even though it kind of does seem like that on the surface, that he's kind of talking it down, going from 50 down to 10. So there are going to be a lot of questions. I guess that's the best way to say it. There are going to be a lot of questions that I'm going to pose to you all, I guess. Some I guess sort of rhetorical ones, but some that I'm just kind of wondering about what we can really get out of this story, because we're given this story. This is kind of the visit with Abraham and his wife Sarah with the two others has ended. They're going down to Sodom, and we're kind of left with this conversation between Abraham and God about what is going to happen. And it's interesting that God first asks, or the Lord first asks, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do?" Is he asking himself that question? Is he? It's almost like he's asking that just for Abraham to hear it, And I don't know if you've ever been in this situation where you tell somebody, should I tell you, should I tell you the secret I have, or should I tell you what? Like, no, I'm not going to tell you. Should I tell you what I'm thinking right now? And then, it's kind of like you already mentioned it, so you kind of already have to say it, because it's almost a way to get somebody more interested in what you're about to say. Not saying that God is doing that in this instance, but I just kind of see that, if you've ever been in, I'm sure you've said it before, at least I have been in this situation where I'll say, I'm thinking something, but I don't know if I want to say what it is. And then it's kind of like you have to say it just because you said that, because you already revealed that you're thinking something, and the other person's going to wonder what it is. So, but we do see that God is telling Abraham this really only because of this relationship that Abraham has with God, and the fact that Abraham's gonna have a future, and his descendants are gonna have a future, and it's important for this to be revealed, what is going to happen. So with that said, what does this whole thing say about what does this whole interaction reveal to us about God and our relationship with God and how God works? And of course, with Abraham and his particular example, God gives him this knowledge because, Lot is in Sodom, Abraham's nephew, right? He's living there. I don't know if we mentioned that before. Nathaniel, did you know that his nephew's living in the city that's about to be destroyed? So that's an important part of the context. Yeah.
A few weeks ago.
And God feels the need to send these two representatives down there to check stuff out. And the only thing I can make sense out of that really is that for one, it shows that this was not, I mean, not that God ever makes a snap judgment on, God's judgments are accurate, but by sending these two down there, we're given this whole story in Genesis 19 about like how they're treated and exactly how bad things really were, in that city. So we're given a story and an example because of that. So it's not just God saying like, yeah, I saw everything and I know that it's bad there and I'm just going to wipe it out. I don't know if it's just to reassure Abraham, but I mean, we're still given this example that physically,
Well,
yeah,
if and maybe this is slightly, because I was just sitting here trying to read this and gain some more understanding of it. But back to a kind of an earlier question that you asked,
yeah,
whether or not in this passage God would have been speaking to himself or not. Clearly, he wasn't just speaking to himself. He was being heard by the others, because otherwise, Abraham saying, like, because the first words that Abraham relates here are, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? And he wouldn't have known to ask that had he not been listening to what God in the story here was either just saying out loud to himself, or one way or another, he was saying it so that he was heard.
right.
He wasn't just thinking to himself and then finding a copy of it here. I think that would have also been unique in the Bible, as far as I know. Like God's actual thoughts would have been. Maybe I'm wrong, but
Yeah, that was a theory that, but I don't really hold to it that this was some kind of inner conversation God was having with himself. But I don't really. It almost seems like it's something that kind of like the "Where's your wife, Sarah?" question. Something to kind of get Abraham's attention.
Yeah.
Seems to. So also, why send the two representatives down there? I mean, of course, if that didn't happen, we wouldn't have gotten the story about what happened to them and the rescue of Lot, and why. It almost makes me wonder if Abraham, how, and this is open to what you all think. There's no real statement as to like how much did Abraham know about what was going on down there? Do you get the feeling that he had a bad feeling about things, or he didn't really know it was?
I
Because
think
it's
he
kind of presented.
really know.
You think he kind of knew?
No, I don't think so. I mean, probably had some idea, I guess, but
And it says that
if he had great
close
personal
enough.
experience, he would have spoken about that.
Yeah. And we don't really get any knowledge that he had any interactions with Lot since Lot moved there. So I mean, as far as I understand it, Abraham can see the cities because he sees, well, at least he sees the smoke from them burning later on. So it's not like he's really far away. So he obviously, I think he had some knowledge about the situation there, but um, he just knew that his nephew was there, and that's another question, is that does it seem like Abraham, because Abraham uses the whole would you sweep the righteous away with the wicked? Abraham's challenging God's, identity, or God's, who, basically calling attention to that. But is Abraham asking this because he wants, because the title of this section is in some of the Bibles, Abraham intercedes for Sodom. But it seems like Abraham's really interceding for Lot. Would Abraham, this might be an impossible question to answer, but would Abraham be as concerned for
I think he
these
would have.
cities if his nephew wasn't there?
I think this is a very. I think this is an attempt in the text here to answer a question. That's relatively straightforwardly put, like, it's almost like a kind of halfway point, or halfway, like, bridge, like mental kind of bridge between, like, the God of, I mean, this is Old Testament, but like the God of Old Testament versus New Testament, kind of like showing some of the thought process there, as far as, like, punishing, like, it shows that he would have been willing, or was willing, I guess, to not be so totalitarian, I guess. Even though this is held up as one of the examples, I think, of that sort of God behavior. But
I mean, the judgment.
It answers the question, like, it's kind of like the flood, right? Like, I mean, how many righteous people were there during the flood? Do we think there was only one in his family? I mean, is that realistic?
Well, in the case of the flood, I mean, there are, of course, it doesn't say this in the Bible, so we can't really go. You can't really. I mean, it doesn't say that Noah didn't take other people onto the ark, but I mean, we're really only given that Noah and his family were the ones that made it through. And we don't really even know if his sons or his wife, or his sons' wives were really. We're just told that Noah was righteous. We don't really know that, I mean, his family, just kind of like with Lot in chapter 19, he goes and asks the guys that are engaged to his daughters, like, hey, the city's going to be destroyed. And they just kind of like laugh at him, so they're given a chance. But
well, here's also a thought. Why? So, I mean, it's Abraham is the source of all the bargaining. The God actually, like, God presented in this, just agrees to everything that Abraham suggests or asks of him. So, like, was it ever really was some of that kind of like a test a bit? Or is this just an example of, I don't know.
I mean, how much of this?
It's almost like the number
about
itself doesn't really matter all that much. Like, if Abraham had said 3 or 1, like, would he have also agreed to that? Because he got no complaints. He didn't get any indication that he was pushing his luck. The only thing that points towards that is the fact that when they stop speaking, it says, as soon as the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham. So he was the one that ended the conversation, apparently. And he ended it after 10. But it's not very definitive on that. Otherwise, I would have said, really, it was Abraham continuing to speak. He was the one that was continuing
working
the
it down
yeah.
Because I would have thought that Abraham would have mentioned 4 as the number, because that would be his nephew Lot, his Lot's wife and the two daughters. So that'd be four.
Yeah. So it's almost the conclusion I'm drawing there is I don't, or at least the partial conclusion is that the actual specific number wasn't the real significant portion there. It was like, what's the point of, it was just trying to make the point that there was like if somebody brings it up, or if somebody sort of maybe passes this kind of test where they're like, hey, you know, like if somebody speaks up for it or speaks up for them, then he was willing to, you know, mete out more specific justice, I guess. I'm not sure how to.
Well, it seems at this time in the world, though, that a man spoke for his family. You know, even later in the Old Testament, you know, it's for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So the head of the house was responsible for the entire household. So Noah was responsible for his entire household, just like Adam was responsible for his wife. You know, it wasn't, individuals weren't necessarily responsible for themselves at that point in time. You know, the head of the household was responsible for everyone in the household. And if someone in the household messed up, the head of the household took the punishment.
You know what? I think, yeah. What I also see here is that one thing, I don't know if this is the direct point of this or not, but so like trying to remember my full train of thought here that I was thinking just now. It's a lesson to take from this is like if you see something wrong, speak up about it, even if it's like, I mean, it took some balls to talk to the it would have to talk to God, right? I mean, he
Yes.
literally said, like, he didn't just say it like, what about
Yeah.
50? He said, like, he actually opened the conversation with, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? You know, and then far be it from
Right.
you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked. Shall not the judge of the earth do right? Shall
Yeah.
not the
Pretty
judge of
big
all the
challenge.
earth do right?
Yeah.
Like that's a direct challenge. Like,
Yeah.
you know, and I think that might be an important thing to take from that is
Yeah.
like,
I mean, yeah. It seems from this passage, and I think this is backed up by other stories.
kind of like boldness or
Well, that God encourages us
courage
to
is rewarded.
challenge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's better than, I mean, it's a lot better than apathy, of course, just being
Yeah.
like, not having any questions. So I think there's an important part of faith and your relationship with God and just living in general, just having
Yeah, I would say
asking
that
questions,
because well, I would say that the way this is told, God would have been already like had made up his mind, like he's going to destroy the place because he already knew that there was only like one or none good
Yeah.
people in there somehow. But it does show him thinking out loud at the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me.
And who was out crying? That was the other.
Right.
Yeah, because it wouldn't have been the people in the city. Some people think it might be Lot complaining to God about how bad things were, but he was still living there. Kind of like how the wife, how the story goes, the wife looks back, as they're leaving and turns into salt, a pillar of
Yeah.
salt. But so they had some kind of attachment to the city, and they knew it was a bad place, but they were still living there. So you wonder if it was Lot was the one that was praying about the city, or
I took it
it
that like
isn't.
one of like the head angels or something like that fed him a report of outcry. That's what I was thinking. It is also doubly odd that this, that he has to go down there. And of course, that's another aspect of why this, I'm sure this is included in our Humanity of God series here.
Yeah.
The fact that he doesn't already just know. Why does he have to go down there? Not only is he bargaining in this, or at least appearing to be bargained with, but he has to go down to check out what's going on.
Yeah, kind of like the Tower of Babel, that he had to go down. But I also think that it's interesting how the story unfolds, and that God still destroys the city, but he also saves Lot. And if they didn't, yeah, I mean, that is a question. I mean, he could have just taken Lot out without physically, it's almost like they kind of physically remove them from the city, and they tell them to go and to not turn back. And God could have abducted Lot and his family and placed them outside the city and then destroyed the city.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's
And I
something
guess
I've wondered about.
I do feel responsible to bring up the fact that like if this was God doing this, like he could have done it better. I don't know. Like you don't need to destroy something with like asteroids essentially to I don't know. You could have started
Could
a
have done
smaller
it
plan earlier.
differently.
It's like, if you get an asteroid heading towards the Earth, you don't destroy it at the last second with 10 million nuclear bombs. You nudge it with a 5 pound thrust like years early, right? Like why would he have waited? What's this
Hmm.
But he's
why?
making a point. He was making a point, and he was illustrating this to Abraham. He was doing several things here. This was an illustration for Abraham. He knew this conversation was going to come up with Abraham. He knew this bargaining piece was coming along with Abraham.
I'm not
He
just
knew
saying
that.
the bargaining piece. I'm saying why did it come to this in the first place?
Well, it definitely is
Same question you could say for the flood or the Tower of Babel or any of that. Like,
well, I mean, the destruction was definitely visible for a long ways around where the cities were.
yeah, but why
It
did
was
he?
definitely a very visible spectacle, But
What was the point of waiting? I guess the only point of waiting until it got
waiting
bad
to,
enough that he had to destroy it instead of just like pushing and pulling making small changes early.
hmm.
You know, um, Is that some sort of balance between free will and, or would it be thought of that way, like as some sort of like, well, I'm
Well,
going to let you go until you're going to give you enough leash to hang yourself with, or rope to hang yourself?
it
Is that what it
does.
was?
I mean,
Or
we are given a little bit of information about these cities. Earlier in Genesis, there's
I
that
guess,
time that they were.
yeah, I guess, sorry to
Yeah,
cut back.
go
I feel like, yeah, so if he was in there just manipulating and pushing and pulling like small levers, levers being like people or, things or events. If he was in there pushing and pulling on a lot of small levers continually, then um, that would remove the responsibility of the outcome from the humans. Like if he
I
was always
suppose
there,
so.
just like
Yeah.
kind of with a kid or something, right? You can't like hold their hand crossing every street forever.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, do you think that consciousnesses of the residents of Sodom, it was kind of got to a point where they were, I'm saying they still had free will, but like they
well,
got to. I mean,
that's another
it
thing,
does
right?
paint
Because
to a, yeah.
even with the idea of what we think of as free will, we're still products of our environment. The people born in Sodom, products of their local culture to a great extent. You know,
Because it does say in 19 that they all surrounded the house, and it said all the men of the city, young and old, and it kind of paints this picture that,
oh, Lot's house or something like that, or
yeah, because
Yeah.
the two men come
struggling to
down, they
remember.
stay with Lot, and then the
Hmm.
men of the city surround the house and say, bring the two guys out so we can have sex with them. Basically, they're trying to beat down the door to get to the visitors that are there. I don't know. It's a kind of a crazy story, but
Hmm.
Tawdry scene.
Yeah.
But it's you know, it was those two cities. I mean, and it wasn't all of the cities around there. It was just Sodom and Gomorrah. There were other cities around there. So, it wasn't like every city around there was wiped out.
For some reason, I always thought of Sodom and Gomorrah as like one city, and that being just a collective name. I don't know why. Also, Gomorrah is the name of that uh, Guardians of the Galaxy character. Anyway,
yeah, I was wondering about their proximity to each other. Um, the cities, that is. Well, it does seem like this kind of destruction does prohibit rebuilding of cities in that location. Sort of like a city, will like with Jericho. Well, I guess that is the Jericho that is there today. Was that the same as location as the Jericho that where the walls fell down?
yes, yes, because Jericho
Yeah.
is the oldest known inhabited city,
Oh, the curse
continuously
was like
inhabited, the oldest known continuously inhabited
yeah.
place, I believe. Well, is that still right? Because I mean, you've got like the
I think
Indus River
Well,
so.
Valley and Yellow
well,
and
the
Fertile
the
Crescent
the
and all that.
curse wasn't that they wouldn't rebuild
Maybe this
it,
is
but it
part
was
of the
like the
Fertile Crescent.
person who rebuilt it would pay with the life of their firstborn or something, right?
Hmm.
After they, so it wasn't like the like the Romans like salting the ground or. But I kind of get that picture with Sodom and Gomorrah. It's kind of like the land is kind of worthless now because it's had all
I
this,
mean, all the land around there is not too
not too great.
not too great anyway. They didn't have oil back then, so or they didn't know to use it for anything or could extract it. Well, like oil, like petroleum. Well, shoot, yeah, petroleum. They had like lamp oil from whales, I guess.
Although they,
Oil from fat.
although they at least believe that they have found the sites of Sodom and Gomorrah now, from where they were struck. But there were other cities, around. I mean, not real close, but around that area. So I mean, it wasn't like they were, it wasn't like they were the only cities. And we're talking cities. I mean, our concept of cities and the concept of cities back then, are different. I mean, we're talking of maybe a few thousand people, maybe, in Sodom and Gomorrah.
Didn't they find impact like signatures in that area? I've seen something like that. There's like an area where there were impacts.
Yes.
And it matches the description of the area in Genesis where it describes where the cities were. So I think it has like the tar pits or whatever that are there, or the salt.
So what I'm seeing is that the geologic evidence points towards an earthquake and a rift forming rather than a impact crater.
Well, it wasn't.
And it's in the almost universally agreed upon location of Sodom and Gomorrah. Is in the Jordan Valley, and so like under or adjacent to the shallow waters south of Al Lisan, a former peninsula in the Dead Sea.
Well, it does say that Abraham was looking down. Like later on, it said that he was looking down, and the cities were in a valley, right? And we saw the smoke, rising up. So we are back, being recorded once again. And did we like the break? I think we did. Yeah, stretch the legs, all that fun stuff, and so some concluding thoughts. And I think one of the main takeaways, at least for me, from this whole interaction is that God invites us to, let's see what I wrote here. Okay. Challenging, and I got to kind of be careful how I say this because there's a difference. I guess, having questions and, kind of like how Abraham asked God in this instance, like, hey, I want this to make sense. And there is room for mystery at the same time, but wanting to understand, I believe, is a healthy part of one's faith, their relationship with God. And it's what we're called to do. I mean, it's one of the reasons why we're here discussing this. And, to try to understand what is happening here and why God did this and why, all these questions. And I think there is a difference between accepting, we're never going to be able to understand everything, but there's a tension between that and we're still supposed to seek to understand.
Yeah, my personal problem arises when situations where the only answer is that it's beyond my understanding, my possibility of understanding, and that is a very dangerous concept to use anywhere or once or anything, because it's just an answer to everything, right? And I feel that it's just a dangerous concept.
Well, there are things that we can understand on some level, but then when we talk about things like the Trinity, at least for me, when I talk about like the Trinity and God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and how does that work, and you can use analogies and say like, well, water can, I guess a popular one is like, is ice and liquid water and water vapor are all the same thing. They're all water, but they are three distinct states. And again, no example's like really perfect. That's the problem. But
I don't understand. I'd be very straightforward. I do not understand that analogy at all.
Okay, so some people would say like Christians worship three different gods because we talk about God the Father, God the Son, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. But there's no verse in the Bible that says the Trinity. There's no verse that says this is the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But it's a theological understanding of what the Bible teaches about God. And it's just especially other monotheists, like especially that's a big objection that a lot of Muslims have about Christianity, is that they say like, well, it's
almost not monotheism at that point, sort of.
Well, that's what the accusation is. But that's why I was saying that it's, as Jesus said, I and the Father are one. But obviously they are one, but at the same time I guess another example could be you are, well, that's not probably, I'll use this example. So let's say your dad is your dad, right? And let's say he's also, well, this happened to me. So my dad was also the pastor of the church that I attended for a while, when I was a kid. And then he also coached my sports team, the track team that I was on. So the same person, but I would deal with him in a different way. I would interact with him in a different way depending on what, if he was coaching the sports, if he was coaching the track team, he was wearing that hat. But again, those are not like perfect examples. So I
think that's a good analogy.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, but
a correlation of some kind that I may not know the correct terminology for.
Yeah. Yeah. So, with things like that, it's almost impossible to totally grasp what that means. But there are things that I do believe we are called to understand. And there are things that, I mean, we're called to generally seek and expand and not get to a point where we're like, all right, I already have it all figured out and I don't really need to think about any of this stuff anymore. And it's
William?
Yeah.
Actually, Laurie found in 1 John 5:7 and 8, for there are three that bear record in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Ghost, and these three are one. And there are three that bear witness in earth, the Spirit, and the water, and the blood, and these three agree in one. So there is actually reference in the New Testament to the Trinity.
Yeah. But they don't, I guess, yeah, I mean, that is more than I thought. I mean, I knew there were examples where it talks about the Holy Spirit and the Son and the Father, but I don't know if it ever uses the label like this is the Holy Trinity.
Well,
but it
think
does
that,
say it does explain it that way. Just like in John, the Gospel of John, it says, in the beginning was the Word, the Word being Jesus, the Son. The Word was with God, the Word was God. So that there are also statements like that.
yeah, but it doesn't talk about the Spirit.
Yeah. Well, and then there are also instances where it says, like Moses couldn't look upon God, but then, when God comes in the person of Jesus, we can obviously look upon,
And then
so there are,
obviously Abraham speaking to somebody here in the passage we talked about today.
yeah. And that's, I mean, I believe that's like the son he's talking to. That would make sense, just, because of what we talked about last week, but which is also interesting, and I don't want to like overly analyze
That's true. I guess
this,
there's
but
nothing that really says that nowhere in the Bible does it claim that like Jesus was created to uh to fulfill that role initially, which he it is to have fulfilled with dying on the cross. Right. Like I haven't seen anything that says that. It just says, well, no, I guess it does say he sent, but it doesn't say that like his son wasn't in existence to already, right? It's not like he created his son to come down and do that necessarily. It's like he was there and then he sent him,
yeah.
which lends credence to your interpretation of who Abraham was speaking to.
Yeah. And also, if you think of, that God is outside, if God isn't bound by time, then he could appear to Abraham. And well, and even Jesus says in the Gospels, he says, before Abraham was, I am, so he does say outright, I existed, I've always existed.
I don't know, if God isn't bound by time, you'd think he'd just, I don't know, start
But
over
we're
again.
given time, though, so it is kind of a bit of a mind bender there, but I think it is understandable that Abraham's asking these questions, and I think it's encouraged because I mean Abraham was known as somebody of great faith, but even then he asks he
I
very boldly asks these questions.
yeah,
What are you going to do? This really?
I just had another thought about that. Like if um if Jesus came down and uh I guess you got to bear with me on saying if, but if Jesus came down here and did all that and sent his only son, it actually adds more weight to that if Jesus was already in existence and it wasn't like part of his original plan, even though in theory it should be all part of the plan. But like if he wasn't like if his son was already in existence and then he was like, oh crap,
Yeah.
like I gotta send this guy, like that's more of a sacrifice than like, oh, I'm gonna like create this son out of nowhere in order to
Oh, right.
to fulfill this role. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, what real sacrifice would that be? Because if you're like, well, you don't even have a son to begin with, but here's a problem, let me fix it by like creating this thing, which I'm gonna just destroy immediately, kind of in a way. That would actually have a lot less value than like, oh, I already have this son that I value as a son, and then now I'm gonna make the sacrifice to, even though he didn't really die, uh, from God's perspective anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the main, I guess this is interesting, and this is something I hadn't thought about till recently, actually, till I came across this. When Jesus was praying to avoid he was praying, to take this cup from me, but not my will, but your will be done, before he was crucified. But that he wasn't praying to avoid the pain of the being crucified, although that was bad enough, of course, but that there was a period where he would be separated from basically God being separated from himself for a period of time, because he became our sin in the eyes of God, so he was forsaken. And then so that just that experience would have been worse than as bad as being crucified was. That experience was worse. So it's it's interesting how these passages in the Old Testament point towards these conversations. And I do find it interesting too that God tells Abraham the plans about Sodom and Gomorrah. It's basically, he says it kind of outright, should I tell Abraham what I'm about to do? Abraham's going to become a great nation.
Yeah, well,
And
it's almost
all
as if
kind of
he's
around the relationship. Yeah.
almost as he says, as if he speaks that out loud in order to, as like a lesson to the other two people that were with Abraham. He's speaking in kind of like a, well, shall I do this or shall I do that? And kind of involving them in the thought process, sort of like forcing them to think a little bit, even though he already had a plan.
Was this after they had already left, or was this?
No, he said that's what he initially said, and then they left, and then Abraham and him had the bargaining conversation.
Wait a second, because I was thinking.
No, they were present for that.
Or at least they were in earshot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. So there you go. And also this theme of because this isn't the last time somebody's going to try to intercede with God. This happens other times. And it does kind of beg the question. Well, I think we get a little bit of an answer. Can it's kind of strange how God allows like one person to make a difference, or
Yeah.
like
To me, the biggest takeaway here seems to be like the interceding thing. Like
yeah,
it doesn't. It's never. At least I don't recall a circumstance where it's sort of honored when it's motivated by a concern for oneself, but when it's motivated by concern for other people or speaking up and doing the right thing, uh, that seems to be honored.
yeah. Um, yeah, that is interesting. Yeah. And one other kind of side note, it's that Abraham doesn't really, as far as we can tell, he doesn't really ever get any closure, because he sees the city burning, and you would think he would just. I think it's understood that he believed that God got Lot out, but we don't have any confirmation that Abraham knew that his nephew was safe. And he just looks down the next day and sees the city's on
Yeah.
fire and the smoke rising up. And
Well, I don't know. I don't tend to think that Abraham was especially concerned with Lot because I think that especially or would have been like, well, I don't think he would have hidden that concern.
you think he would have just come out and asked, like,
I think he would
"Hey,
have been
can you
like,
get my nephew out?"
I think he would have, yeah, either something like that, or I don't think he would have like hidden behind some other moralization of his argument.
Mm,
Um,
that's
it
true.
doesn't seem to be who he is.
Yeah. Well, they did go their separate ways, so I
I think he would have at
wonder.
least acknowledged that that
Yeah.
was part of his concern.
Right. Hmm.
That
Well,
coupled with
I
the
know
fact
that
that it
he
was never wrapped up
rescues.
for him. Yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
that, I don't
Well, he
know.
does go out of his way to rescue Lot, like earlier, but he also rescues all the people that were taken, all the other people that were taken captive.
Yeah.
So,
I don't get the
huh?
impression he and Lot were close. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that is a good thought though, that he would have probably mentioned that outright.
Because as the
Um,
conversation went, that would have been intentionally deceptive if he had some
yeah, to kind
ulterior
of talk
motives.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, huh? Yeah. Well, and I think it also is kind of astounding that that God would have spared the city for the sake of 10, just 10. That's, I mean,
Yeah.
interesting.
So
You know.
he was either almost like already certain of the outcome of whatever number Abraham threw at him, even if it was small, or
Yeah.
that's what I tend to think of there. I think that's the only
Hmm.
plausible explanation.
Interesting. Well, any other thoughts? I do find it interesting again that God entertains this whole, it lets Abraham do this kind of back and forth thing, and that also that we're given a detailed transcript. There's a lot of stuff that I'd like to know, but for some reason we're given this detailed transcript of Abraham talking the number down, and it's evidently something that he was allowed to do, and that it's important for us to know that he was allowed to do this. Um,
Yeah, well, it's also a good lesson for any rulers or leaders to follow. Like, say you had a king that thought he was above the law, then that story right here is what's the word? Uh, what's the word for like a prior established
Precedent.
a precedent? That's a precedent for
Yeah.
challenging even a king or a pope or someone like that. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
Like there's no one that you are above speaking up to.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Huh. Yeah. At least if they're an effective leader, they should allow you to question.
Yeah.
Well, I guess within reason, as long as you're not being like disrespectful.
Yeah. If God wasn't
But
above being questioned, then who the heck are you?
yeah. Well, that's true. Yeah.
Right.
Huh. Yeah. Well, Bill, do you have any thoughts or?
No, you all have been adequately covering those. Um, I did find one thing of interest about the possible effects of how God manipulated uh, things to happen there on Sodom. Uh, uh, there's ample evidence that subterranean deposits of uh, a petroleum-based substance called bitumen, similar to asphalt in the region south
Huh.
of the Dead Sea. High percentage of sulfur.
Hmm.
Uh, and
So it
that
could have been like explosive. Oh, I'm sorry.
pressure from an earthquake could have caused the bitumen deposits to be forced out of the earth through a fault line. And as it gushed out of the earth, it could have been ignited by a spark or surface fire, and it could have then fallen to earth as a burning, fiery mass.
Huh.
Um, um, it's been formulated that this theory uh, turns out that the sites are located exactly, sites of Sodom and Gomorrah are located exactly on a fault line along the eastern side of a plain south of the Dead Sea, so that um, it would be possible that this is exactly what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah.
Huh.
And as Abraham uh, looked toward the plain, he would have seen the dense smoke rising from a land like smoke from a furnace, which would have been the petroleum-based fire.
Hmm.
So, that's one theory about how God could have caused all that to have happened.
Huh.
So,
That's an interesting hypothesis there.
just one thought about it all.
Yeah. Well, next week we will be. I don't know what we're going to be looking at next week. I knew at one point that I believe it is something with. We're still going to be on in the life of Abraham. Yeah, it's probably going to be something with Abraham. Um, if not, if not, there is the Jacob wrestling with God. That's something that we'll eventually get to. But I don't want to skip too far ahead. But
Oh, yeah,
anyway,
that's quite a ways from now.
that's quite a ways. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for listening, and we will be back later on. Have a good week.